So, Caleb,
Yeah.
what is your Myers-Briggs and
My
your
Myers-Briggs.
Enneagram?
You want to guess?
INTJ.
INTJ. That's very close.
What are you?
INFJ.
INFJ. Actually,
Yeah.
I think I'm thinking one up.
Huh?
I think now I feel like you mentioned that to me before.
Yeah.
And then what about your Enneagram?
9 wing 1.
I have no idea what that means, but okay.
Yeah, I don't know what that means either.
Uh,
Like the Enneagram, I have no idea what it means, but
I know that
Yeah.
one is like the stable, steady, faithful one, right?
no, one is like the perfectionist or
Yeah,
like
perfectionist.
reformer
Yeah,
or
right.
whatever.
Oh,
Oh, because loyalist is another one,
Oh,
right?
oh.
I think. But I don't know any of these numbers.
well, I'm
so.
an ENFP. And
ENFP.
my Enneagram, I get tied when I take it, like a 3 and an 8, which I've told is not supposed to work. It's not supposed to happen, but whatever.
Huh. That's why you don't believe in it. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Wait. Yeah. Do people guess your Myers-Briggs incorrectly
Oh, all the time, yeah.
all the time? What do you think?
A lot of people think I'm a T and a J.
T and a J instead of a F and a P?
Well, because I can come across that. Because I mean, usually when people hear me, it's like in a more polished type of setting, right? Preaching a
Yeah.
message, and I look like I'm like well put together and like organized type of person. But then if you ask like Cindy, or even like the staff,
Yeah.
like, I remember someone said that, like, "Oh, aren't you a pretty organized person?" And I remember I can't remember who, one of the staff was like, "I'm like, oh."
Was it me? No. Okay.
They're-
Master Doug, organized. What
They
the?
they know me too well now.
Yeah. Interesting. Oh yeah, we should introduce the episode. We haven't even started. This is all pre-show.
Yeah,
all pre-show.
Well,
Hello,
I
everybody.
I kind of said it though, with maybe this could be part of the intro. But anyway,
Oh, is this part of the intro now? This is the intro. This is the greatest intro because it
Yeah.
segues perfectly into our topic. But this is Grace Coming to Chats, by the way, if you didn't realize after watching the video for like 2 minutes. We are produced by Grace Coming to Church here in Philadelphia. And today we're talking about personalities,
personality.
which is why we're talking about Myers-Briggs.
How about your
Yeah.
disc? You know your disc?
I have no idea.
How about
I've
your
never
big
heard of
fives?
this. My big five? Oh, that
I'm
one.
just
That
kidding,
one. I have no idea.
How about your color? I heard that's another one.
What? Color?
I feel like like there's like I don't remember. Someone was telling me about this one time.
Do people just come up with like new? It's like, what Harry Potter character are you most like?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Ron apparently.
You're right.
Or what
Wait.
Disney princess are you?
Yeah, what Disney
I
princess
think
are
I was Ariel if I remember correctly.
Well, all the BuzzFeed articles, BuzzFeed quizzes coming back. But personality, P-Dog. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, I want to
Yeah.
talk personality, just because I know it's something a lot of people talk about. By the way, that we're able to have like several minutes of talking about all these random things, because I think naturally we like to be self-aware, which is good, right? I think we like to be a little more self-aware, to understand ourselves more. But I think that where it gets a little more tricky is that we also like to categorize ourselves. We like to put ourselves and others like in boxes so that we can better understand. I mean, mentally it helps, right? We like structure and categories because it helps the world feel simpler, right? That's why oftentimes like the way you teach in like grade school, middle school, etc., is through categories and grouping things together, because it helps us to make sense of the world more so. Because it's harder to understand things abstractly versus understand things concretely fit into boxes. And so personality helps us to do so. But obviously, I'm starting to hint at why it's problematic, because humans aren't neat and tidy. We don't necessarily fit into categories in the same way. We're a little more varied, I would say. But the reason I want to talk about this also was because in a message previously, looking at Martha, Mary, Lazarus, I said offhand comment about Martha where I was like, oh, she's like an Enneagram 8. I did not mean to say that, because I don't like imposing modern day sort of personalities on like other people, especially ones that we don't really know, because we only know Martha from the little bit that she's mentioned. So it's like, you don't want to from it, like be an armchair psychologist and say what people are from a distance. And so I sort of backtracked it, but then I also said offhandedly, I don't really like the Enneagram anyway. And I'm like, well, that might like make people feel a certain way. And so I thought it'd be good to maybe
pouring
talk
your
about
own fuel in the fire.
So I thought maybe a good idea to talk about personality, how I think it's helpful, but but where it's also maybe a little less helpful.
Do you mean helpful in like just the faith context or like overall?
In general.
In general. Okay.
Well, I mean,
Faith
I don't want to
context
make like a
permeates
faith
everything,
bucket. This is my faith life. All of life is obviously
Yeah.
under the faith bucket. So
I agree. But some people like to some people categorize it separately, right?
Mm.
Because it's like, oh, this is useful for diagnosing why I feel this way in this aspect of life, as opposed to like, and then I'll apply it differently, maybe, right? To like, oh, this is how I interact with God, or something like that, right? So what do you feel like then to start off the discussion? What do you feel like are the limitations of this, like these categories for like personality and stuff like that?
So I'll start with the Enneagram and just share why I'm not like in love with it. My issue with that is it's one-dimensional. Like you are an 8 or you are a 1 or a 9. I mean, and then people a lot of times will say that people will retort, well, you can have like wings. I'm like, well, that's still sort of one-dimensional, right? Because 9-wing 1 is still just like one thing. Versus the way that humans are a little more varied, a little more complicated than just a one-dimensional person, right? To say I am a challenger, and I know like there's a little more like nuance to it, and you read into it, but still, it just feels a little one-dimensional. And also, my other issue is it feels a little arbitrary. The fact that there's 9, like who came up with like 9 different personality types, and how come some of them are grouped in different ways? Like I know like they group like three, these groups of 3, depending on sort of like base emotion, and all that feels a little like just arbitrary to me. So it makes me a little like anxious or uncomfortable. And my other issue though with Enneagram is that the way that when people say they're this, then they oftentimes imply then they're not that. And I feel like that's very self-limiting. And I know the heart of Enneagram, especially because I read one of these books that talks about Enneagram, particularly from a faith context, and they're saying, well, Enneagram should be a door to understanding your limitations so that you can try to overcome them, which is good. But I think most people don't do that actually, because most people will be like, oh, because I'm this, that means I'm not that. And so I'm never going to step into a way that's going to challenge me in some sort of way to be something I'm not. Like I am I'm trying to think of it like an example, right? Like someone who is like a 2, like they're a helper. So I'm a helper. I'm not a 3. I'm not ambitious, right? So I'm always going to just sort of be on the sidelines. I'm never going to be the one that like to lead or something like that. But I'm like, no, I think you can still like lead and step into more of like an ambitious sort of achieving type of role. And I think the idea of being like a helper should show you that maybe your tendency is to be more on the sidelines, but maybe you need to challenge yourself to step off the like sidelines, step off like the cheering side, and to really like step into maybe some more like leadership in some sort of way. So that's my issue, is where it can be self-limiting, and actually in that way it becomes almost self-fulfilling. Because when you start to identify yourself as this, you reinforce it within your behavior, which I don't think is always the best way to go about it, right? I am a 3, and then now I start to self-identify and live it out. And so our behavior sort of becomes even more like we start. I think you get what I'm saying there.
Yeah, it's very much so like James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits. It's like the things that you do. Again, this statement I don't entirely agree with, right? But his one of the points that he makes is like everything that you do is like casting a vote for a certain aspect of your identity, right? And so if you think that you're a 2, you're a 3, or maybe. I feel like maybe you could even expand that to like other ways of categorizing yourself, right? Beyond just like using the Enneagram system, right? If I am this person, like I could even identify like culturally, right? I am a Cantonese man, right? Of Hong Kong descent, right? My parents are from Hong Kong. I do things that reinforce that. Like I drink milk tea, right? Like that casts votes for that sort of identity for me, right? And then as you're saying, right, maybe cultural identity and ethnic identity is a little bit less flexible than something like a personality, because I'm literally born into this, right? But it does reinforce that like sentiment within me, right?
Yeah.
Like I am this because I do this, and I do this because I am this.
Yeah.
Right. So then, how do you see? Okay, so we've talked about like I think that's a very clear limitation, right? But what do you feel like are the benefits, right, of then thinking about personality in this sense?
I think the benefits are to understand yourself and your tendencies, and I think it's helpful to know that because you can recognize that you have tendencies to be and to act a certain way, and maybe that's good. Like you want to sort of grow in the areas that you're already naturally sort of inclined towards, but then you also don't want to limit yourself though. So like that's where I'm drifting off into like where I say it's a little more challenging when you start to limit yourself based upon your personality. Like I'm not this, right? Because I think personality is helpful in saying what you are. It's not helpful when we say what we're not. because I don't think we should always say we're not something just because like a test that we took said we're not that. So it helps to sort of say who we are and how we're tendencies. And I think that's what's helpful. And it also helps us to recognize that we're different from other people. We think differently, and that's okay. And I think that's very helpful, particularly in just relationships, whether friendships or dating relationships, marriage relationships. Recognizing personality difference is very helpful to then being able to work through conflict, because you recognize that maybe this conflict is not real because it's actually just an issue of personality, and that can lead to better understanding of one another and where they're coming from. And so I think that's especially where it's helpful when you're talking about like interpersonal relationships, because you can start to realize that we're different people and then we come at things differently. And so maybe there's conflict. Maybe the conflict isn't something that is not a real conflict, because it's just really just a clash of personality, and that allows us to sort of work through that in a healthier way.
I feel like we've talked about this a little bit in like a past podcast or whatever, but like, how do you, I mean, as a pastor, you probably know so many more people and how they're doing like spiritually than most other people will. But how have you seen like personality play out in faith?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Actually, I remember reading a book when I was in seminary, and it was talking about the relationship of like Myers-Briggs personality to being in ministry, and it was talking about how in pastoral ministry there's a lot of people who are actually like ENTJs.
ENTJ.
Because obviously, there's almost an assumption that you have to be extroverted to be a pastor, which I don't think is true, but there's almost an assumption, expectation. And there's also an assumption, expectation that you're going to be like well put together. Like I was kind of mentioning before, like you're going to be an organized, you're going to be like unwavering, unshakable type person, which everyone obviously in our faith, we should be like unwavering, unshakable. But our personalities can lend us to be like more different, right? You're more careful with your words. You're more calculative, more, you're more like crystal clear, like sort of black and white type of thinker, right? That's like a TJ type person. And they were saying that that's not always the best way to think about like ministry. Obviously it's helpful to an extent, but not everyone is like that. And so we should have expand our view of what like a pastor is versus maybe an image of a person that we place in our minds. And I thought that's very freeing for me, because I'm not a TJ. I'm an FP, the opposite. I'm not like the most well put together, always like, sort of more like black and white type of thinker. I am more of a free thinker, actually. I'm more like, the ENFP are sometimes called like the free thinker or the idealist, or because or free spirit is the word I was looking for. And so it actually was very freeing to me, because I felt like sometimes I thought maybe I'm not a good enough pastor, not because of real reasons, but because of actually just like cultural expectations of personality. The pastor has to be like the well-disciplined, well-put-together, well-dressed person that always looks like they're always very sure and confident of everything they're doing and saying. Everything's very calculative. They're always the kind of person that will have the Bible reading plan that they're working through at every given moment, but that's not how I think, actually. Like some days, even if I'm reading a plan, I'm like, actually, no, I feel like God is calling me to reasonably different, right? I'm not like the kind of person who's always going to go things very linearly as other people. And so that was very freeing for me, just to recognize that, maybe that's a personality thing, and there's a different way to express our faith, different way to express even our own ministry. We relate to God in different ways. And I think we even see that in the miracle of Jesus healing Lazarus, right? He met Martha with like truth, with words. He met Mary with love and presence, compassion. And I think it was because of personality. We can interact with Jesus in different ways, right? You have your ones, right, who will love their theology and love to like categorize and like dissect the Bible in that way. And then you have, I don't know the Enneagram enough to know like the others, but then you have your ENFPs who like just kind of like want to know God like just more experientially, right? I obviously we all need to know Jesus. We all need to have a base level of like theology, but our experience of him can look different based on personality. However, don't let it limit you, because that's where that's where I said like it can help you in your tendencies, but don't let it limit you, because the ENFP should also enjoy like reading theology and getting to know God in that way. And the person who loves theology should try to seek more like intimate type of emotional type of like interactions with the Lord as well. It might not be more common, but we shouldn't ever like cut that aspect of a relationship with God out because of, that's not who I am. Yeah.
It's just like when we use personality as a tool, or personality types as a tool to better understand yourself, but like not take it to the extreme
Mm-hmm.
is basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
So how do you feel?
Well, what I
like,
mean is,
or-
don't make it self-limiting, because then it just becomes
Sure.
a self-fulfilling. It's becomes self-fulfilling,
Sure.
and it just
Don't-
reinforces the behavior that you already have versus the ability actually to grow. It gives you,
Right.
in the language of Carol Dweck, the psychologist, like it gives you a fixed mindset versus
fixed mindset
versus a
versus the
growth mindset.
Then how do you feel like the body comes together, right? The church comes together, given that people are of, well, obviously different personalities, right? Like what does a body that's like growing together right into its head, like Ephesians 1 says, building itself up in love, look like? I guess we'll apply the lens specifically to personality, right? With personality differences and like different experiences of God and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the body is made up of supposed to be made up of people of varied personalities, skills, talents, etc. Right? Because that adds to the richness and the sort of fullness of the body, right? As this beautiful tapestry with drops of paint on it, evoking sort of like the language of Ephesians, right? We're like drops of paint on like a tapestry that makes something beautiful when it comes together. The manifold, that shows the manifold wisdom of God and bringing together many different people. And so we should embrace that aspect of it. We shouldn't expect everyone to be the same personality, right? Not everyone is going to be the concrete, categorical, systematic theologian. Some people will be the more abstract thinkers, right? Obviously, we all want to be within the range of like orthodox theology. I'm not saying that, but our way of understanding God can look differently for different people. And we should be willing to embrace that, such that people feel like they can express the relationship with God even in different ways. And so, I think we should, as a church, need to learn to not assert cultural expectations of what like a Christian looks like that are purely cultural or personality driven, but allow there to be a richness and a fullness to how we can know and love God and relate to Him as a body.
Do you think spiritual gifts are given in alignment with personality?
I'm sure there's some sort of relationship. I mean,
right. I guess you could say like being
obviously
a pastor
like
is
someone who's someone who says they have the gift of administration, but then they're like an FP like me. I'm like, not really quite sure about that, right? Because gift of administration usually requires a certain way of thinking, right? Versus even like, I don't know, maybe like in the gift of teaching as well too. It requires a certain level of like personality. Though I think everyone can. But even with the gifts, right? Everyone should strive to live out different ways they feel God calling him into, right? The gifts sort of give us a natural tendency of how we serve, but we can all serve in different ways, right? Someone shouldn't be like, I will never do this because that's not my gift. At certain times, God may call us to do something that maybe not our gifting, just because it's something that He's calling us into. Maybe not full time or for like the long haul, but maybe just for like a short season, right?
Yeah, I feel like personality and gifts is like one of those, or more specifically in the context of gifts, it's like one of those thoughts that I've had in the past where it's like gifts and talents, like these are things that God has given to me, but like and it's like, you should go and use those to like serve God, build a church or whatever, but they so quickly become idols that it's like at some point I'm like, well, I feel like there's coming a time when God's going to be like, okay, you need to give that up for a time, right? Yeah. So then you can recenter. So it always feels like there's like this like weird like push and pull where it's like, I have this gift and talent, but like, am I gonna have to give it up, or am I using it the right way, or like whatever? And I feel like that's, at least for me, it applies a little bit to like thinking about like personality too, right? Especially maybe in the, as you're saying, in the slightly more erroneous framework of like taking it as like this is a category that I fit into and I can't step outside of it, right? Whereas like if I am this personality type and I like firmly believe in it and I am like looking to, I guess, like self-actualize as much as possible, right, within that framework, like there will come a time when I'm asked to step outside of that framework, or to give that up and to act in almost like maybe even opposition to what I think I am, right? I don't know. God is very interesting,
and you should be willing to do that.
Yeah.
Again, that's just one of the issues with the Enneagram. It's so easy to latch onto it because it's like a single number. you start to follow Instagram pages like, threes at work, memes for three, life as a three. And you start to really identify as this thing so strongly when it just starts to self-actualize and just cement yourself as that, and it limits the potential for like growth and ability to like change.
Right.
Because now it's not even just our own way of thinking. It's actually just it's basically like a structure for how we like live our lives, which is not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah.
A good thing to do.
Yeah. There's like a degree of resonating with other people who have similar experiences, but that's different from making that your paradigm.
Yeah, exactly. It shouldn't be your paradigm for life. Like that's where it just becomes an issue. You're just self-actualizing it, and you'll always be that. It's kind of like, it's like, I don't know, I always mention this from Zootopia. It's a good movie. But, I can't remember the guy's name, but the fox, right?
Yeah.
He's like, at some point when everyone starts assuming that as a fox, this is who you are, you used to start to be that, right? Like a sly, thieving fox, right? He said, like, as a kid, that's not who he wanted to be, but everyone always assumed that's who he was. So he just realized he just had to be that. And we kind of do the same thing to ourselves, right? Oh, I'm a 4, so I have to be this way. And then I can't ever, even if you don't really want to, you just sort of force yourself down that path because you just assume that's who you are. So that's and that's always the issue with identity in general, is that we shouldn't allow these ways of understanding ourselves, these like personality tests or whatever. They can help us understand ourselves about who maybe we are and our tendencies, but we shouldn't let them tell us who we're not.
Sure.
That's where it just becomes a real big issue. Because then, like you said, you won't be able to step into. Then you'll limit yourself from stepping into things that maybe could be really growing for you, because you say, "Oh, that's not who I am. I'm not going to do that." But yet, that's not a good mindset to have.
On the topic of resonating though with people, there's like certain things in the Bible. I feel like, okay, I shouldn't even say certain things in the Bible. Like much of the Bible, and like I'll say like the arc of the Bible, right, and the drive and the push feel like universally applied, right, or quite universal. But do you feel or see like people? Actually, I don't even know if that's how I want to frame the question, right? It's just like, it's almost like the question of like, oh, I see Bible characters or like certain stories that for like some people, or like things that happen to like people in the Old Testament, or like the way, or you could even say the way that Paul writes versus John writes, right? Like there's a certain allure to certain people writing, right? Or like certain characters or certain stories, for some people, right? Or for some personality types. Like for example, I enjoy reading Romans more than I enjoy reading First John. It doesn't mean I don't like reading First John, right? But there's like a different like sort of a vibe to it, right? At least for me, and maybe for some other people. And
I love all of John. I love the Gospel of John. I love John. Yeah.
Right. It's like, and I think we brought this up once in a previous podcast where you're like, I think someone's favorite book in the Bible says a lot about them, and you're like, some people like Romans. Romans is not my favorite book in the Bible, by the way, but I'm using it as an example. Ephesians.
Oh, okay. Ephesians.
So close enough. No, I'm kidding. Still Pauline writing. But some people like Romans, and some people like Psalms, right? So it's like, how then, right? Should I guess, I want to say relate to the Bible. There we go. Maybe I'm starting to land a plane a little with where this question is going, because this is a very convoluted thought. How should I relate to the Bible when there's like some characters and some stories that I'm like, I can get behind that because I see that as my experience. But then other things are like, maybe in the best case scenarios, like I just don't understand, right? Because I don't have those experiences. Or like in the worst case scenario, then it becomes even a little bit judgmental. It's like, oh, how could somebody do that, right? Or how could somebody say that? Why do they need that from God, right? When I need something, or so much less, right? Or like something different, right? So how do we relate to the Bible through our personality?
Yeah. Well, I think again, it just goes back. Don't limit yourself. Don't say like, oh, I only resonate with like Romans, Ephesians, or Paul's letters in general. So like, I'm only gonna read that. And I think there's a lot of people who do that. Like, oh, I just love Paul's letter so much, and that's all I'm gonna read. And they don't like the Gospels as much. They don't like some of the first, second, third John, that kind of stuff. But don't read the whole Bible. Don't only read what jives with you, what makes sense to you. Because then you're only reading what feels good. And then what's that mean? It means that you're your own authority, right? If you only read the things that you like and that you agree with, then that means that you are your own authority. And your authority is based on your own understanding of who you are, which is probably flawed in general anyway, because we don't know ourselves fully, right? For those of you who think you know yourself fully, like wait till, especially if you're single, wait till you get married. Then you realize, wait, I don't really know myself.
Noted.
Yeah, but yeah, like read the whole Bible. Don't only read what like jives with you or what makes sense to you, because then we're limiting ourselves from the ability to grow and to see past our own limited understanding. And so, yeah, like it's great if people love reading certain things. Maybe read those times when you are like not doing well and you need to like lift your soul, because that's like what brings you life. But don't only read that, right? Read the whole Bible, right? There's a richness to it. There's a depth and richness to God that we need to like understand and seek to know more and more. We shouldn't confine him to our own limited understanding based upon what we enjoy or what like clicks with us.
Dang, personality.
Yeah, personality.
Do you feel like there's you've heard of like any like Christian like personality categorizations?
Well, I think a lot of Christians have really like clung to the Enneagram, which
I've noticed that.
I heard someone say that they think it was actually developed by like monks, which I don't think anyone really knows where it was created, but
interesting.
I don't know. Who knows? I read that somewhere, but for whatever reason, Christians recently are really like, I see so many sermon series at different churches, like Enneagram series, and I was like, oh, sure, but I don't know. What does that mean? I don't have to show up for eight of the 9 ones, which is the wrong attitude. Obviously, that shows that like limited, like we should try to learn from all sorts of people. But yeah, I think Enneagram is the one that a lot of Christians latch on to. But I don't think there's any Christian personality tests, right?
Yeah.
Because ultimately our goal is to be Jesus, right? We want to be like Jesus. We don't want to be like a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever. We don't want to be like a E or an I versus N or N or S or whatever, right? We want to be like Jesus in terms of a changed character, a character of love. Yeah.
That's actually interesting, right? Because I think, we're starting to diverge from maybe personality a little, but like bring up the topic of becoming like Christ, right? There's a certain sense, or I think I've even thought this in the past or wondered at it, where it's like, well, if all Christians become like Jesus, how do won't we become very homogenous as a people?
A lot of times people say, oh, I want to be like Jesus, and they love to emulate the things that they already enjoy, right? There's some of those people who are like very fiery. They're like, I'm going to emulate Jesus because I'm going to go and overturn tables. They're like, okay, you're already like that right now. Maybe you actually need to work on the gentler, compassionate, like, a bruised reed isn't break type of side of Jesus, right? Right? And maybe those who are more like gentle and like caring, maybe they learn more like the fiery, like confrontational Jesus, right? Jesus is a very varied person, right? Because different circumstances, different people, he interacted differently. Because I think Jesus transcends our own categories of personality. Some people are like, oh, Jesus was an introvert because he needed to get away to the mountains at times. I'm like, okay, sure, he needed to get away. We should all want to get away to the mountains at times, whether you're extrovert or introvert. But he also put himself in the crowds, and likewise, whether we call ourselves introvert or extrovert, we need to have times in groups and with others in relationships, right? And so, yeah, I think Jesus transcends those. And so when we think of becoming like Jesus, maybe the area you need to grow like Jesus is the area that you don't like, the character side of them that you don't like as much, because that's probably a hint at the area you need to grow.
Right.
Because I think people love to point out the ways Jesus is, because if it like something they feel like a natural affinity towards, then they dismiss that, right? You see a lot on Facebook, right? When people get really angry, like, oh, Jesus, don't forget Jesus like overturned tables. I'm like, yes, he did. And, we should obviously at times have that fiery, like justice side of us, but there's also like a caring, gentle, compassionate side as too that we need to like, that we should strive after as well.
So then is there like, I'm going to use the word personality, but I don't mean personality, right? But only for the context of this discussion, right? So it's like, is there like a ultimate personality that we're like driving towards, right? Or like, I guess
number 10.
Number 10. 10 on the Enneagram is what we're all shooting for. The fifth
That's
letter of
Jesus.
the Myers-Briggs, yeah.
Jesus.
But there's almost like a sense in which like, are we all striving to, again, why I brought up homogenous versus like non-homogenous, right? Is like, if we're all going to be like Jesus, then does that not stifle some of the individuality.
No, you know, again,
right?
because the point is that we know Jesus and our relationship with him looks differently, right? Again, as a church, we embrace the varied ways that of character of who we are, or like the personality that we are. But the character we're striving for, you know, I think character and personality are different. Character is
Interesting. Okay.
your the love, the compassion, generous spirit, the gentleness, or even the or like even the justice and the fieriness, that all that, like, right, there's a certain character, like goodness, standing on truth, right, of who we are, and that's what we should be striving for. It's going to look different though for different people based on personality. So I think there's a way of saying that there's character and there's personality. When we formed into Christ, like our character formed in Christ, but our personality might be a certain way. But again, our personality is not a static thing, and that's my issue. Don't think your personality is static. It changes. It can change, and it certainly will change over time.
That's the main theme of this podcast.
Yeah, our personality is not static.
It's not static. Yeah. So you see character as like maybe like a heart level working.
Heart level, like
like where my heart is inclined, and like what my deep desires are, and stuff like that, and personality as like the outworking of that.
And so when we even think of our identity, where our sense of self, don't put it in the personality, right? There's a sense of understanding self, which is helpful, but our deepest sense of self should come from the character of like who we are.
Right.
Like, we are a child of God, and there's a character that should flow from that. And my hope is that we would self-identify in that way, not in the personality. Personality obviously is part of it's part of our identity when you think of it, but it's more of an outer layer, right?
Sure.
We shouldn't think of our personality as like this deep core layer.
It's not the deepest layer of the onion.
That's why, again, that's why all these Instagram, like, I am a 3 and memes for 4s, you know.
Do you lurk a lot on the I am a 3 page?
Well, like, I get suggested these things.
r/3.
Yeah. Well, I found one time, and I was like, oh, interesting. And then I got really annoyed, and I unfollowed it. But then now, like, I'll always forever get like,
oh, because you followed once, the algorithm's like, oh,
yeah,
Doug likes this.
Yeah, exactly.
Even though he unfollowed. I see. But anyways, do you have any concluding thoughts on personality? I feel like we went a whole bunch of different places.
Yeah. I think just, again, we change. We're changing people. The problem is when we start to self-actualize a certain personality, it limits our ability to change and to grow. And my hope is that we would see personality as a tool to recognize our areas of weakness, to recognize our tendencies and areas of weakness, but not to assert some level of, like, I don't know, like, just, I don't know what the right word, like categories, like imposing categories and walls on who we are. That's where it just becomes a little more, I think, just unhelpful and even like dangerous to an extent. It limits our ability to growth, because we should have growth mindset, not fixed mindset. Not a fixed mindset.
But those are categories in and of themselves, P. Doug. What are we going to do about that? Anyways.
Give up.
Everything's a category.
No.
But anyways, am I allowed to say, hey, leave your Myers-Briggs or your Enneagram down in the comments below? Should I say that?
Yeah.
Let us know what your personality
I'm sure
type
so
is.
many people are going to actually do that.
Maybe 2. You can be that one person. I will leave a comment.
Okay.
Maybe I won't. Maybe I will. You should leave a comment. And say what you're.
Great episode. 5 out of 5.
Yeah, pinned. I'm an 8, by the way, or sometimes I'm a 3. Doug. Anyways, thank you so much for spending some time with us today, listening to this interesting discussion of personality. I bet you didn't see this one coming. We are, again, Grace Covenant Church here in Philadelphia. If you're new here, go check us out at philly.gracecovenant.net. And we're starting a new sermon series soon, or maybe by the time this episode comes out, we'll have already started that new sermon series. Either ways, there's more sermons coming on Sunday. So come join us for a time of worship, fellowship, prayer, and teaching. Yes, again, thank you for spending some time with us today, and we will see you next time.